The San Benito County Planning Commission welcomes your comments. Each individual speaker will be limited to a presentation total of 3 minutes. If participating on Zoom, select the Participants tab and click the raise hand icon. If you are using a phone, please press star 9. To raise your hand, when your turn arrives, you will hear that you have been unmuted. At this time, state your first name, last name, and county you reside in for the record.
Thank you. Commissioner Pack, could you lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Could we have roll call, please?
All commissioners are present, 5 in chambers.
Thank you. Department announcements?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, Benny Young, Director of the Resource Management Agency. Just a few things that I thought you might want to be aware of. First of all, we took a draft recommended capital improvement program to the board earlier this week on Tuesday. And that also requires, before final adoption, a conformity determination. So we're planning to bring that to you at your next meeting. You might be interested in that item. It's a pretty intense program, at least in year one, and a little slower in the subsequent years, but it was a pleasure putting it together, and I'll look forward to going over that with you at your next meeting. Secondly, there are 2 items on the agenda next week that you may find of interest. There's no comment needed or warranted tonight, but you might want to track the board's discussion next week because they both relate to the general plan. The first item has to do with housing, the housing element, and there will be a report on kind of a broad overview of the housing element of the general plan. And then there's a couple specific issues that the board may refer back to you. We'll see. But if they decide to take some specific action, it would probably come to you before it goes back to the board for final adoption. One of those has to do with strengthening our commitment to and our ability to satisfy the RHNA goals for affordable housing. And so I expect some discussion on that. And the other one has to do with the possibility of considering a growth cap for unincorporated San Benito County. That item was requested by the board some time ago, and so the report is going to the board. We are not recommending any specific action at this time on that. The second item has to do with the general plan and the commercial nodes. That was also requested to be brought to the board for discussion and possible direction to staff. Again, we're providing a pretty broad outline of the economic development element of the general plan and the way the commercial nodes fit into that. There's a chance that the board may wish to provide some specific direction in that regard that would require your consideration prior to coming back to them for final adoption. I don't know. We're not recommending any specific action on either one of the 2 items I've talked to you about, but I thought you might find it of interest and wish to track the discussion next week.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
That's it for the department. Okay. Thank you. Any public comment? The public is invited to comment on any items not on the agenda. Is there any comment on Zoom? Any comment from the gallery?
Court 4140 Southside Road. I went to the board meeting Tuesday, and after the meeting I talked to Benny, and the reason I was talking to him is because I know, just like you folks have gotten probably some pretty people that are angry about our roads. And I was telling the people that I know that I thought that, especially, they were going to start on Fairview Road, and Benny said that they'd run into some problems with the contractor because I thought they were going to be started by now. And I recommended to Benny that maybe they should keep the public informed of what's going on, and Benny assured me that that's what he was going to try and do in the future to keep the monkey off of our backs like you folks. So, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not going to take 3 minutes anyway. So, Elia Salinas, San Benito County. Just on top of what Richard said, because I also had the discussion with Ray Espinoza after the CAO after the Board of Supervisors meeting. And there is on the website the information. It's a little difficult to find, but if you can, let the public know, which is why I'm speaking now, that on the website, for the San Benito County website, there is a link that gives you the list and gives you a map of all the roads and the streets that are ready to be or on the list to get done, and what category they fall in from the worst to the best or something like that. But anyway, for those folks that are listening today, thank you.
Thank you. Any additional public comment? Seeing none, public comment is closed. Consent agenda. Is there any public comment for the items on the consent agenda?
None by Zoom.
Thank you. Any in the gallery? None. Commissioner comments, suggestions, any amendments to the meetings? Minutes of the meeting? Is there a motion on the table?
I'll make a motion.
One moment.
Thanks, Tavin, but I don't know how to read this packet. Can I speak now on land use? Is that part of the,
No.
where's that at? I
That's
can't
further
find
down.
consent. Okay, all right, thank
Yeah.
you.
Is there a motion on the table? Commissioner Scagliotti?
I have a comment about Shore Road.
Oop.
Benny, you got to do something bad about Shore Road. I think it's more
No.
dire.
Sorry, Commissioner, this is for action on the consent agenda. Yeah, that comes at the end of the meeting.
Okay. No
Commissioner Robert Rodriguez.
I'll make a motion for the consent. We move forward with the consent agenda.
Okay, we have a motion to adopt the consent agenda. Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? 5-0. Thank you. Okay, item number 5, the regular agenda. Resource Management Agency zoning ordinance update report and presentation.
So I'm going to introduce Eric Norris. He's with Interwest, our consulting group that is helping us with this, and he will be presenting tonight.
Thank you, Ariel. Can you all hear me? I will take that as a yes, because all I can see is myself on the screen. Ariel, can you put the slideshow up, please?
Slideshow is up. Thank you.
There we go. Well, first of all, before I start, once again, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, thank you for having us here. It's a pleasure to be here and give you kind of an update on the code and also show you some of the things we've done. And we're going to ask you for a little bit of advice tonight as well. I'll get to that in a second. Also wanted to just give a shout out to your staff, Robin, Tavin, Ariel, Mike, Jamila. They've been just really fantastic to work with over the last few months. We would not be where we are and as far along in the process without all of their help. So let's go ahead and start. Don't want to spend a lot of time on background stuff, but I did just want to, again, for those who are watching and maybe haven't been taking, watching the process as it's unfolded so far. We are updating the zoning code, and the question is, well, why do we do that? A few answers to that. One is that it's a rather old code. It was the last time we comprehensively went through and updated the code was 1984, which is quite a long time ago. Much of the code dates back actually almost 2 decades beyond that, back into the mid 1960s. So it is a rather old code, and it just really needs some updating. Some of the things we want to do as part of that update are to make it more clear, more concise, more user-friendly. We kind of compare the code to a house that has been added on over time, kind of like the Winchester Mystery House. There's a lot of stuff there, but if you want to get to the kitchen, you have to walk through the bathroom, that kind of stuff. It's not the easiest code to use. We're also implementing the 2015 general plan, and that's something we'll talk about in a minute, is that the zoning code is intended to implement the general plan. It looks back to the general plan for guidance on things like what land uses ought to take place, at least generally, in different parts of the county. So we're always looking back to the general plan when we're saying, well, can we do something? Can we allow certain land use here? And so on. We're always looking back to the general plan to make sure we're not doing something that the plan doesn't allow. We're also trying to modernize land uses and regulations. There's been a lot of advancement in the way codes are written, since the 1980s. So we're going to bring a lot of the regulations up to date. We definitely want to streamline development review. We've met, I think, with all of the planning commissioners and had a chance to dialogue about the existing code, what's good and what's bad in it. And one thing we've heard consistently from them, from members of the public, from staff, is that there's a lot of process built into your current code that maybe doesn't need to be there. A lot of ways that we can make life easier for people who are doing business, living, farming, just going about their daily lives in the county. And finally, we want to comply with changes in state law. There have been a number of things, especially on the housing front, that have changed over the last few years. So we'll be making sure that your code is up to date with the latest status of state law. Next slide, Ariel, please. So the thing we want to talk to you about tonight in terms of getting some advice from the commission is a category of sort of businesses in the home. And those fall into 2 different categories. One is home occupations and one is rural home enterprises. The county currently allows people to do that, and that's pretty standard. Rural home enterprise is a little bit different in this county than it is in most other places in the state, but that's a reflection of the type of county that you are. But almost every agency up and down the state allows home occupations in some manner. These are separate, by the way. I mentioned that these are sort of businesses in the home. So these are really separate from actual businesses that are taking place that involve uses that are permitted in whatever zoning district. So for instance, if you're farming in an agricultural district, that would not be considered a home occupation. But if perhaps the farmer or their spouse wanted to run another business, maybe they want to sell something mail order or do some other kind of operation in a farmhouse that isn't part of farming, then that would probably be a home occupation or perhaps a rural home enterprise. So the update, as it says here on the slide, is a great opportunity to fine tune the way we regulate these things now. Next slide, Ariel. So really quickly, home occupations are allowed in all zones that allow residences. If you can have a home in a zoning district, you can have a home occupation. Now, a few rules: they must be operated by a resident, so it has to be somebody who's living there. You can't have employees who don't live there. So if you're the parent, you can have your spouse as part of your home occupation. You can have your children as long as they live there, but you can't hire somebody to come in and work there. It generally has to be limited in scope. So if I'm looking at that house where a home occupation is taking place, it shouldn't look any different from what a normal house looks like. There's no signs on the outside. There's no customer parking and any of that stuff. There are some things that are specifically prohibited. We'll talk about some of those in a minute. Animal hospitals, insurance offices are specifically prohibited, and you have to operate it in the residence, so inside the home itself. Next, please. And then the next category from that is rural home enterprises. And as I mentioned, that's one area where you go a little bit beyond what a lot of other jurisdictions that we work in up and down the state do. So these are only in ag and rural zones. So the AR, AP, and R zones. Has to be operated by a resident. That's still like a home occupation. But here's where you get a little bit different. You can have up to 2 non-resident employees. So in addition to mom and dad and the kids and whoever's living there at the house, you can hire up to 2 people to come and work there. There's a limited range of uses, but a little bit broader than a traditional home occupation. A couple examples up here: a machine shop, auto repair, and some other commercial and industrial uses. Now, this requires an administrative use permit, which is an opportunity for, this is reviewed by staff. It's an opportunity for staff to impose conditions on that use. So if you're getting an administrative use permit to run your rural home enterprise, the staff can say, well, if you're, for instance, running an auto repair, they can maybe limit the number of cars you have there at any given time, limit the number of, or the hours of operation or the days of the week, those kinds of things. It's all intended to make sure that whatever you're doing there as your rural home enterprise isn't negatively affecting the neighbors. Another key difference here, I mentioned a home occupation has to happen in the home. A rural home enterprise can be in an accessory structure. So if you are on your ag property, you have a house and maybe you have a 3,000 square foot detached shed or barn or whatever you want to call it, you can run your rural home enterprise in that other building, and that's different from a home occupation. Next slide. So again, really quickly, a comparison: home occupation, any zone that allows a residence, which is all the ag zones and all the residential zones. Rural home enterprise is limited to just those ag zones, AR, AP, and R. Next slide, please. And then on operations, just briefly a summary here. So home occupation, offsite employees, no. For a rural home enterprise, yes, you can have offsite employees. People who don't live there can come work there. There is no minimum parcel size for a home occupation, but there is for a rural home enterprise. You have to have at least 5 acres. Home occupation, fairly limited list of the types of businesses you can run. Rural home enterprise, an expanded list, a broader list. Home occupation, no administrative use permit required. Rural home enterprise, yes, you require a use permit. Next slide, please. Home occupation has to happen in the residence and not happen in an accessory structure. Rural home enterprise, it can happen in an accessory structure, which might look like this example we've shown here of someone who could do this in the county. You could be repairing cars in an accessory structure as a rural home enterprise. Next slide. So a couple other things about home occupations. These are things you can't ever do according to your code. You can't generate traffic, quote, beyond that normal to the district. Now, I'll tell you, that's been the subject of a lot of discussion over the past year. Historically, one of the things that cities have tried to clamp down on, and in counties as well, where home occupations are allowed, was they didn't want to have all those delivery trucks coming to the house. Well, if your house is anything like mine, I look like a UPS hub here a lot of the time. And most homes nowadays do, with homes, you know, people using Amazon and supermarket deliveries and just everything coming to the house now. So that's getting a little bit looser than it was in the past. You know, 2 or 3 years ago, you may have said, oh, more than one UPS truck a day, that's way too much. And now you'd say, well, more than 10? Okay, maybe that's too much. Again, back to the list here. Things you can't ever do in a home occupation. You can't store materials outside. Remember, everything is fitting inside the home. It shouldn't look any different than any of the surrounding homes. You can't create noise, smoke, odors, things like that. You can't sell anything to customers who come to the location. That's pretty common, and that's really key, again, to maintaining the residential character of the neighborhood. It's not a place where people come to do business. You generally do it all mail order, over the phone, internet, whatever. Can't repair vehicles as a home occupation. Again, that's the difference between that and a rural home enterprise. And then these are a couple of just interesting things here that we highlighted. Not sure what was so bad about real estate or insurance, but you cannot run a real estate office or an insurance office as a home occupation, even if you're just doing it over the phone. So that's something we can talk about. I don't think that raises any general plan issues, but that was just one thing that struck us as kind of interesting about why those were specifically called out as things you can't do. You also can't teach music or dance to more than one student at a time. We've shown the music studio in our little image here. That would fall under the category of don't create noise, but for some reason, your code says you can teach music or dance to one student at a time, but not two. Don't know why. Next slide, please. And then we get into a rural home enterprise. And as I mentioned, the rules are a little bit more expansive here, but there are still some common things. Well, first of all, you can't employ more than 2 offsite people. You can have 2, but not more than 2. You can't store materials outdoors. That's still no different. You still can't create noise or smoke and so on. You can sell things on site. Well, you can't sell things on site that are not related to the on-site business. So you can sell things on site. For instance, if you were making candles there at the house as a rural home enterprise, you could sell those candles to people who come to the house to buy them. But you couldn't sell something that was made somewhere else, delivered to the house, and then sold. So it's trying to keep it to something that's sort of home focused and not becoming more like a traditional retail store. You have to operate between the hours of 8 a.m. and 9 p.m. You can't open earlier than 8. You can't stay open later than 9. You can't store flammable or hazardous materials. And again, even in a rural home enterprise, you can't teach music or dance to more than 1 student at a time. Next slide, please. So here's where we get to the questions for the commission. And there are a few here that we've talked with staff about that we'd like your guidance on. And I mentioned one of these in particular requires a general plan amendment, but let's just go through these really quickly and then we can dialogue with the commission. So the first question we have is, would you allow a rural home enterprise to be operated by a non-resident? Now, I've flagged here that this would require a general plan amendment because what we're talking about, and one thing that's happened on a number of occasions, especially with a number of small businesses that might have been located in the city having to close down and then looking for some other location to establish, they would go out into the rural area where a property owner may have that 3,000 or 4,000 square foot shed or barn or whatever. And they would say, hey, I had to close down my auto repair facility over in Hollister. I'd like to open up here. Now, if it were the property owner running that business, that would be okay as long as he was running it, or he could hire a couple people to do it, or she. But someone coming in outside now and basically renting space in that accessory building and running a business that's not connected in any way to people who are living there, that's not permitted. So the question for the commission is that something you would want to entertain? It starts creating more of maybe a commercial type zoning than the general plan currently allows. So that's something to think about. But next question that we have for the commission, what about having more than 2 offsite employees? Maybe increase that number based on parcel size, based on the type of business. You still have an administrative use permit, so you can limit the number of employees if it became more than 2. But should you have more employees? Should you let them open before 8, and maybe on the other end, close after 9? What about removing the minimum 5-acre parcel size? Is that really necessary? And is a 5-acre parcel always needed for rural home enterprise. There are a number that you could easily think of that don't really create impacts. For instance, running that mail order candle business. If it's all happening inside a structure, why couldn't you do that maybe on a 1 acre or a 2 acre lot? And then we're also proposing a simplified list of permitted uses. And you'll see that in the draft code when it's presented to you in about a month. Getting away, and there's a general intent in the new code to get away from very specific lists of things you can and can't do, with more performance-based lists of the ways you can do things and the kinds of things, just the types of things or the categories that you can and can't do, rather than specific lists. The code currently says that among the things you can do as a home occupation is floral arrangement. Of all the things that they could have listed, we're not quite sure why floral arrangement rose to the top there, but that's where it is. And I think, let me look on my sheet over here. That's where we end this. So Errol, maybe you want to take the, is there a way to leave this up while we discuss this with the commission?
Yeah, I'll leave it up.
Okay.
I'd like to hear what the members of the
And
public.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, just to let you, I am done. I'm here to answer any of your questions. Errol and the staff for the county is ready as well. So look forward to hearing the discussion.
Okay, thank you. I think we're going to go to public comment first before the commissioners have their say. Are there any members of the public that wish to speak on this topic? We'll start in the gallery and then go to Zoom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Elia Salinas. So I have a question with regards to the home occupations. I mean, is he also considering the micro enterprises, AB 626 and 377? Is that part? Is he including this into it? That was a presentation that was done to the board, but it hasn't come back, and I don't even know if they make plans to coming back. But it is where AB 626 and 377 with the micro business enterprises, that's what they call it. If the county approves it, then it would also force the city of Hollister to have to abide by it, and the city of San Juan Bautista. So I want to know if this report also is including that into it. And then with regards to more than one person to teach them how to dance or sing or whatever, what about swimming? A lot of folks invite people over to their places and teach kids to swim. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please. Mr. Betancourt.
I have 5 acres, and I ran a trucking business out of my 5 acres for years. I did not park any trucks at my facility, but I don't really see anything wrong with doing that. The problem is how do you control it? I mean, if you let a guy have 5 rigs or trailers parked on their property, and of course you got trucks going in and out, but usually early in the morning, late at night coming back maybe. But my problem is I got a neighbor that's not very he's not very clean. He's got stuff all over. And I'm a property rights individual. If somebody wants to do that, as long as it doesn't endanger my property, then I'm okay with it. What I'm trying to say is the zoning as it is right now, I believe that the county isn't doing a very good job at all about cleaning up people that are not very clean, or so you got a difficult job. The other thing is, I don't think we need more regulation, but also I believe that we do need regulation because folks get out of hand. That's about all I can say right now, but you guys got a tough job.
Thank you, sir. Do we have a speaker card or two left?
Good evening, Commissioners. My name's Walter Windus. I've been a consultant for the San Benito County Airport Land Use Commission, and I would like to speak on the subject of zoning applications around airports. I don't see any reference to it in the documentation provided. Typically, development is more restrictive in the vicinity of airports, and I think that restricted development needs to be highlighted when the public is looking and considering development projects in the vicinity of airports. There's a concept called airport influence area. I recommend that the airport influence area for each airport, public use airport in the county, be identified with a combining zone that makes it very clear to a prospective landowner or developer that there are additional restrictions to development beyond those listed in the zoning code. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to try and answer them, but thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Is there any public comment via Zoom?
No.
Okay, commissioner comments or thoughts? Okay, question from
I'd
Mr.
like to
Rodriguez.
know more expansion on the RHE, on what type of businesses could be operated under that. I'm just trying to figure that out, because I see real estate and insurance as one. I'm not in either business, but that doesn't seem like it has much impact, but I'd just like to see what actually falls in to that category.
Eric, would you like to pull that up?
Yeah, let me get there. Let's see. You know what section that's in, Ariel? I'll pull up your current code. Here we go. Okay. Okay, you can all see my screen here? Ariel, can you see, can you all see my screen?
Yes. Can you zoom into the text? It's coming up on the screen very small.
Let's see. There we go. Okay, so here's the list of things you can currently do as a home enterprise. So beauty parlor, barbershop, I won't read the whole list here, but these are the kinds of things you can do as a home enterprise. So there's a, fairly deep, as I mentioned, one thing that struck us about this current list is that it is very detailed in a few ways. The fact that taxidermy and floral arrangement are specifically listed as just maybe a little bit old-fashioned. I'm trying to see if there was. That's different. But to answer your question, these are the things you can currently do as a rural home enterprise.
Thank you. Any other comments or suggestions?
Well, I think something, that should be addressed, two obvious fields of expansion, given, the developments and work from home, is just, clarifying and enabling, professional services, the potential for professional services, and also looking at software and computer development industries. Santa Clara, I mean, three of the biggest corporations, Hewlett Packard, Apple Computers, and Amazon, are all famously businesses which started in garages. One of the advantages that San Benito County has is that, so that's something I would, like to suggest is, for somebody that's trying to create a startup, or having that, recognizing that we are adjacent to the largest concentration of tech industry in the world, so.
Thank you.
Oh, I just wanted to address some of the. I mean, I'm just gonna be very frank. I mean, I think we all know of businesses, under the table businesses and things of that nature. And I think the county, we should really be promoting businesses in a way where, there's a lot of people, I'll be frank, that are breaking the rules, but don't even realize they're breaking the rules. So I would really hate to continue on with creating the environment of, well, if your neighbor doesn't like you, he can pull up the rule book and find a reason to get you in trouble. And I just don't think that's conducive to wanting to run businesses. I think it's kind of anti-business. So I guess my suggestion would be, or, how do we still maintain, I guess, order and rules and make sure it's conducive to both parties. And that kind of leads me into the fees. For example, Amazon delivery trucks or any kind of delivery trucks, those do have impacts on the roads. So I guess, I know San Francisco was looking into that with starting charging fees for delivery trucks and stuff like that. Is that something, I don't know if we can look into, with directly charging those fees onto those actual businesses. But anyways, the point is, I think just creating a more better relationship with the constituents is that we are business friendly. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Scagliotti?
May I make a comment? It says rural home enterprise, right? So you have people that are in a rural area, and one guy wants to keep it like a resort for himself, for his family.
Is your mic
And
on?
got a guy next to him that wants to run a business.
Is your mic on?
Yes. And we got to kind of balance this a little bit. You don't want to have a guy there with 200 employees banging away all day long when he's got his neighbor. Then he bought into this 5-acre residential area. And believe me, I'm all for money in business, I guarantee you. But we got to be careful how much you allow to do in these residential areas. You can't have a trucking company come in there and go day and night, but a small guy with a computer business, kind of quiet, that'd be kind of cool.
Mhm.
But we just kind of got to watch what we're doing.
Okay. Are there any thoughts or comments about allowing a non-resident of the property to start a business?
I'd like to kind of continue on Commissioner Scagliotti's comments. I think one thing that we should look at is perhaps making a distinction between rural home enterprises that are not particularly vehicular users and rural home enterprises you know, say trucking or cab dispatch or, you know, stuff that's adding traffic. Like maybe that is one distinction that we, you know, we want to encourage in general rural home enterprises, but if it's something like, you know, an Amazon, you know, center where there's an impact on the roads from heavy traffic, we need to consider that. Or, you know, that is something we should address as we revise the rural home enterprises. Now, onto the subject of the being operated by non-residents. Okay, so the difficulty here, on the one hand, I think encouraging entrepreneurialism and attracting entrepreneurs to this county is a worthy thing. That being said, we don't necessarily want to have the exceptions swallow the rule. I'm just trying to brainstorm how to thread this needle, so to speak. But I think having some allowance for non-residents to, you know, with an eye towards encouraging entrepreneurialism. I would like to hear the other commissioners' thoughts on the subject.
Any thoughts on that particular item, Commissioner Scagliotti?
I don't know how I want to word it. Let me think about it.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm open to exploring the concept of allowing a non-resident. I think that could have more discussion. Perhaps staff could provide some background information or their suggestions or thoughts on that issue.
I have a comment, Robert. If you open it up to non-resident, then you open it up to a complete business, and this is a rural home enterprise. So if you open it, like, again, I'm from letting people do what they want, but if you open it up to non-resident, then it's a full-blown business. You might as well, then you should have a place in a commercial area to do your business. That's how I look at it.
Okay.
That's a good point.
Robert? No? Okay. Julio? Either way? Taking it on? Okay. What about allowing more than 2 off-site employees?
I think that, you know, towards, you know, encouraging employment and job growth in this county, widening it possibly to 5? 5 is still small, you know, 5 employees is still a small business. You know, once you go beyond 5, that's the point where you really need to be having an office and an established site. But now, more than 2 off-site employees, this can be part-time or full-time, as it is currently worded, or because that's another thing to consider is, you know, the distinction between seasonal, full-time, and part-time employees. But I think in general, the idea of opening it up to maybe as many as 5. What is everyone
That's the
else's?
number that came into my mind, so, and I see Commissioner Scagliotti nodding, so
I'm okay with that as
I'm
well.
okay with that.
I was just gonna build. I don't see why not. I mean, then we get to the point where people just hire under the table. So, like, you know, if we want to promote business, so I think that's a good.
So the consensus is 5.
Full-time, just to clarify.
Sure.
So
Right.
maybe there's 7 on payroll, but 4 part-time. Or, so I just want to, 5 full-time, but let's say there's 6, but all of them are part-time. Just 5 total, whether it's full-time, part-time.
I think 5 total would make it easier.
I think 5 total on payroll, part-time or full-time, that's my opinion.
And maybe we can specify or clarify, that's 5 on site? So if there's remote worker employees, that's not necessarily handled by? Yeah, we're just trying to avoid density in something
Well,
that's
I
not
think it's
zoned.
5 employees that don't live on the premises. It doesn't matter if they work on site or they work somewhere else. It's just that they cannot have more than 5 people on the payroll that do not live on the property.
Tavin had a question.
Principal planner.
Well, in the spirit of the garage innovation, and us learning how to, is this on?
Does,
Hello, check. And us learning how to work remotely, the impacts to neighborhood would be who shows up and who arrives. But you might have a remote office with someone else's garage that has 5 employees, or you've got 3 people in Singapore, but yet the neighborhood's not going to know if you've limited it on site. So that's my only thing is you would, and it's going to be hard to regulate one way or another, but you can count cars, and you'd hope to encourage rideshare, but I wouldn't want that kind of limitation.
Yeah, but that's just 5 on-site employees. So if you got 5 people working in your home business, you're fine. If you got 3 guys outside selling, they're not on-site employees. So it doesn't matter.
okay.
That's a moot point.
So no more than 5 non-resident employees on the premises. So they can have additional employees as long as they're not working from the location.
Yeah.
Okay. What about the time frame? Before 8? After 9? Are there any thoughts one way or the other? Or just leave it as is?
I'm okay with the 8 a.m.
Yeah, the only thing that I can think of is bakeries, but a bakery is, requires such infrastructure that it would have to be, its own thing, and it would have to have its own commercial. So you couldn't really yeah. So I think keeping the hours as they are.
I think that means open to the public, right? Because we did have a bakery that was running off of this, and I'm sure they were up at 2 or 3 in the morning. So these are hours that are open to the public, not necessarily.
Yes, hours to the public.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so consensus to leave it as is? Okay, any thoughts on removing the parcel size minimum?
Do we have anything in terms of the sort of the administrative history as to why that rule was set in the first place?
I doubt it.
Okay.
No, okay. Simplify life and remove it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Doesn't seem to serve a
That's a consensus.
particular purpose.
And simplifying the list, making it less restrictive, I think would be,
Please do.
yep. Okay, that's a consensus. There we go. Yes, our Assistant Director.
Thank you. Just to clarify, these are all of the different sort of parameters that we're talking about would be subject to an administrative use permit. Anybody who wanted to exceed any of these or do something a little bit different would be subject to a conditional use permit. But in any event, we're always going to be looking at impacts, regardless of, what the upper limits are. Traffic, noise, smell, disruption, compatibility. So that goes without saying, or should, that all of these are discretionary decisions made by staff with input. Go ahead, sorry.
I just kind of want to go back to like the ride share. I don't really want to make it a rule, but is there any way we could still somehow incentivize ride share if you have a business? Maybe, I don't know how that would look or how that even would work, but not necessarily making it a rule, but provide some kind of incentive. I don't know.
If we quantified in terms of trips instead of bodies, that might help to deal with, again, how many trips are coming in and out of the site. And maybe you have 4 folks in a car or 1 person. Not optimal, of course.
That might make the ordinance more complex, though, right? Trying to write in something about all the, I don't know. I like things to be simple. Just my opinion. Are there any other thoughts or comments before we go back to staff for a summary, if there is one? No? Okay. Ariel?
No public comment.
Okay. Are there any additional comments from staff?
to summarize, item 1 will remain that it has to be operated by the resident. Item 2 is going to be a total of non-resident 5 employees on site. To allow Rural Home Enterprises to open before 8 a.m., we are going to keep our time frames. If someone wants to have different opening times to the public, then they will come for a conditional use permit. Removing minimum 5-acre parcel size, we will be removing the minimum parcel size, and we will be simplifying the list.
Okay. One more thing, if we could find out whether or not the micro businesses that the public member discussed.
Yes, we will dig into the micro businesses and address that. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Thank you. Then yes, Assistant Director.
Sorry, just one more comment on the micro businesses. My understanding of that assembly bill is that if the board were to adopt that, we would not be able to regulate the zoning of those. That's my understanding of the legislation.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, well, thank you for the presentation, and we'll move to discussion item number 6, cannabis permit status update.
I'm sorry, Ariel, did you want to finish off the rest of the zoning code presentation?
So we did also want to show our tables. Eric, do you want to bring, as you kind of saw our current code, it's lists, and then if you want to bring up our tables, I'm sorry, we had broken up the presentation.
Okie dokie. Continuing on with item 5.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, thank you for giving us a few more minutes. We did want to touch briefly on this. Before I do that, let me just say one other quick thing. The speaker who was asking about the safety zones around airports, there is a specific airport combining zone in the code that specifically calls out the areas around all of the airports in the county and directs the reader to go back to the airport land use compatibility plans for each of those facilities. So that's baked into the code, and that's definitely there. But one thing we wanted to talk about really briefly, this came up in a lot of conversations that we had with the commission members, and certainly come up in our conversation with staff, is about making the whole question of what can I do in what zone easier to answer. So what I put up on the screen here first is in the current zoning code, this is the AR zoning district, and the way that uses are listed. Basically, every zone has its own list, and those are generally, a number of pages apart because there's a lot of regulations that go with each zone. So they're listed like so. They tend to get very detailed, as we mentioned, just under the category of rural home enterprises and home occupations. The listing of things gets very fine-grained and very highly detailed. You can do this, you can't do that. And one thing that happens if you're, say, a business coming into the county and saying, well, where can I do X, Y, or Z? There's no one place to look at different zones and compare across them to say, where can I run such and such a business? So compare that with what we've done in the updated code. So this is a preview. You'll be seeing the entire code, as I mentioned, probably in about a month or so. But we've taken that, let me turn on what I'm showing you. So we've taken that text list and turned it into a table. And we've done a few other things here, which are really important too. We've vastly simplified the way that uses are listed. So they're more in big categories now. So for instance, in agricultural uses, one thing that we heard time and again, and definitely agree with it, is to make life easy. Make it easy for people to just be a farmer. Let a farmer be a farmer. Let's not try and get up in his or her business all the time with a lot of regulation. So you'll see simplified listing of uses over here. You see all the zones together in one table. So all the ag zones are here together in one table. So if I'm looking at doing commercial composting, I can see that I can do it in AR, AP, and R. I don't need to flip between the three zones to see which one allows it and which one doesn't. You'll also see a number of things. Well, I'll just highlight a few of them. One thing that came up and was actually part of our charge when we started on the update was the issue of promoting the wine industry in the county. And there was originally, we've been talking with staff about creating a separate winery combining zone and a different zoning category for wineries. We talked about it and decided, well, let's just make wineries a use you can do in any ag zone with an administrative use permit, a fairly simple staff level permit. Hotels and motels, the same thing. Selling agricultural products, very easy. Selling agricultural products produced in the county, even easier. That's just a permitted use. If you grow it in the county, if you produce it in the county, even if it's not on your property, you can sell it on your property as a permitted use. There's no other permits required. So that's kind of an introduction to what we've done with the use tables, and the residential tables, the industrial tables, and so on are very similar in that we've collapsed the list of uses, made it easier to figure out. You're falling into a category of use rather than a very specific use. In your industrial zones, in your current code, for instance, it lists dozens and dozens of kinds of products that you can make in an industrial zone. And we've replaced that basically with two categories. Light industry that happens totally inside a building with no indication of what's happening on the outside, and heavy industry where you can now see what's happening. Because if you're making something inside an enclosed building and there's really no indication, there's no odors and dust, there's no smoke coming out of the smokestacks, it doesn't really matter what you're making. So you don't need to list all those things. You also see in here, if you go to, let's go to the glossary really quickly. So we have a category of commercial agriculture in the land use table. And we've defined that, I think, more broadly, but appropriately than in your current code. So commercial agricultural is, the production of crops for sale. Now, we call it out separately from livestock farming because it really has different impacts. But commercial agriculture, includes the delivery and distribution of crops to customers. That was one thing that came up in our review and our discussion with staff. Make sure that you can not only grow things, but you can distribute them. And we expanded it even farther to say, well, farming includes a number of other things. You're storing your equipment. You're storing materials that you use in your farming operation. You're repairing the equipment and vehicles that you're using in a farming operation. We wanted to make sure that we captured all the things that farmers do and just made them a permitted use. Really try and make the farmer's life as easy as possible. And I think that was what we wanted to talk about here. In terms of schedule, we have delivered to your staff an internal draft of the code. So they have the entire code. They've been looking at it for a couple weeks now, and we're going to get back together with them probably in a couple weeks. There's a lot to look at. We appreciate their diligence and their attention to that. We'll be meeting with them, as I said, probably in the first week in June, going through their comments, turning those around, making the changes as needed. We'll be folding in this input that we got tonight on the home enterprises, so we appreciate that. So we're on track to get you a draft code to look at, and we'll introduce that to you at another study session, probably in then early July. And our intent is to get that out in front of the public as well, put it on the website, let people download it, comment on it. We want to make sure we get everything right and that everybody who has an interest in this has an opportunity to look at it, comment on it, and then we'll eventually end up in hearings here at the Planning Commission and ultimately at the Board of Supervisors, probably in the fall. So it's been, as I mentioned, really a great working relationship with your staff. We've gotten a lot of work done. We meet with them every week to to talk about the code. We've had a number of internal, half-day work sessions with them. They've been really great in helping us get to where we are. So, Ariel, I'll turn it back to you. I'm here to answer any other questions that you do have, members of the commission.
I just have a comment. I'm curious as to the FFA and 4-H projects, why that's specifically listed and why it's limited to AR and AP. I just find that fascinating that we bothered to single them out.
Well, I would just answer that that's in your code currently. And having dealt with this same issue in other places, I know that participants in FFA are very sensitive to feeling like they're not wanted. And we didn't want to do anything that seemed like we were in any way changing how they were regulated. So we just left the current regulations in. You can change that, you could expand it into additional zones, but what's in the draft code is what's in your current code as far as that particular use goes.
Okay. Thank you. Any comments or suggestions regarding the charts that we just saw? No? Okay. Is staff finished with the presentation?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Thank you all. Moving on to the next item. Cannabis updates.
Chair Gibson, Commissioners, thank you. Robin Bolstergrant, Assistant Director for Planning and Building. So we were asked to provide an update on the permit status for cannabis applicants. And as you can see in your packet, there were 4 proposals that came to the Development Review Committee. That's a pre-application process, part of the extensive vetting that these folks have to go through. 2 of those turned into actual CUP applications. And if you want the location, we can provide that. I didn't put the general area for those 2, but they're both incomplete. The first one, manufacturing and distribution, we're waiting for an archaeological report and a biotic report. And then the second one is also incomplete, waiting for some drainage information. But they appear to be compatible with the zoning setback requirements. We are making efforts to try to streamline as much as we can, given the process. And we will be coming back to talk about process and other changes down the road. But for now, suffice it to say, we are trying to keep the CEQA review process in-house, which provides some more ownership and also saves on time and expense. We are making changes to the code through the folks that we just heard from to allow for self-distribution. It's not clear in the current code that you can actually distribute your own products. We think that should go hand in hand. If you're growing something or you're manufacturing something, you should be able to take it off-site to another licensed facility. And then some of the setback requirements we've been clarifying with the applicants that we have, just to make it more simple for them to understand what's being required. But there have been delays, for sure, in addition to COVID. These folks continue to deal with banking issues, insurance issues, and the market is difficult, to say the least. So they have a lot that they're struggling with, and so whatever we can do to help in the short term, we certainly will. As I said, we will be coming back to the board. We've heard that they want to entertain retail, and so that will be a change that will be coming hopefully rather soon. And then other changes to the process. I think it's overly clunky, a bit onerous, and there are definitely areas that we can help cut through some of that without sacrificing environmental protection, neighborhood protection, and the like. So that is the report.
Okay,
Thanks so much.
thank you. Is there any public comment?
None by Zoom.
None by Zoom, okay. In the gallery? Ms. Salinas?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I spoke to, I think there were 10 total applicants, and I spoke to 8 of them. Nothing but kudos to the Ag Department, the Ag Commissioner and her staff. They were very, very pleased. That's where it stopped. I don't know about, she just used the word streamline, and I'm sorry, I don't know your name, Ms. Grant?
Robin.
Robin.
Bolster Grant.
Anyway, it wasn't streamlined. I mean, the first application process started in April of 2019. We're in 2021. So a lot of the complaints was that, or are, not that, is that you were asked to continue to, you put your application in, and you gave them what you wanted, you got the information, and then they go back again. And this happens with the planning department a lot. You go through the planning and you submit it, and they go, okay, here you go do it, and they come back again, and they could have marked it the last time they came to visit, and now they see it, and now the person, the applicant, the contractor has to start all over again and get the work done, resubmit an updated plan, give it back to the planning department. So there's an issue here with the planning department. It's everybody knows it. So the cannabis industry, we want them here. We've been asking for them for years. 3 years later, we still have nobody operational. This is just obscene. They jump hoops, and they jump through fire, and they're still not operational, and it's very expensive. They have gone back, and they have their consultants, and they have their attorneys, and it gets to the point where either they just financially cannot turn back because they've already invested too much money to turn back, and they've got to keep going, or that just the request from the planning department is just obscene. It's just absurd to have to go through, and you've got 5 things, and you get the 5 things done, you submit those 5 things, and then they come back and say, oh, well, you got 3 more to go. Where does it stop? We need to have somebody in the planning department that actually knows what they're doing. I'm sorry, that's the problem. That is the backlog. 3 years of going through this, and some of those applicants, not one applicant had anything positive to say, like I'm saying. Ag department, totally positive, so friendly. Anything that they could do to help out, they did it. But the backlog is in the planning department, and and the regulations, they're so strict. They're more strict here in San Benito County than they are in the surrounding counties. So there's an issue here that needs to be taken care of. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any additional public comment? Hearing none. Commissioners, do you have any comments or suggestions? Commissioner Julio Rodriguez.
Just a question. What are the repercussions from the state if we do not abide by, say, all the regulations or regulatory actions? So what would the impact for San Benito County? Let's say we approved a cannabis business or industry of some sort, and they were not following California's regulatory actions. What would the consequences of that be?
Well, it's a 2-step. Actually, the way it's crafted right now, it's more like a 3-step. But in addition to your local permit or license, you have to apply to the state. They are in the process of streamlining as well, I might add. Currently, there are 3 different agencies that cover different aspects of cannabis business. You have the Food and Ag, you've got for cultivation, you have a different agency for manufacturing, and it's been confusing at the state level. The state cares about, well, they care about a lot of things, but one of the things that they task the local jurisdiction with is to make sure that these folks follow CEQA. And that's why if we can get our arms around letting people know what they can do to their project coming in the door to make it more eligible for an exemption or for a negative declaration, something that's less onerous, less costly, less time consuming, that will help, because that's the big thing. They have to deal with the water board. They have to deal with Fish and Wildlife. There are numerous hurdles, and I wrote the ordinance for Santa Cruz County, so I can tell you that it is an iterative process, and no jurisdiction has gotten it right the first time. And the folks in Santa Cruz are still like, what was she thinking? But they're still going back and having to see where those pinch points are. And we are totally committed to doing that. We want this to work for folks, but it's not easy. And like I said, I mean, banking and insurance, you still can't get a bank account. So these folks are, sometimes carrying around a lot of cash, and that's concerning. So we will make our process as easy as we can, give them the information up front, not have them have to circle back around. Absolutely, I don't like hearing that, and that's my charge. That's why I'm here. But the state has their own set of regulations, their own enforcement arm, and we will work very closely with them to make sure folks know the rules and they're following the rules.
Thank you. Commissioner Scagliotti.
I have a question. How soon will this be streamlined for these people to get moving forward after 3 years of wasting their time and money? How soon will we have this streamlined?
Well, the way it's set up right now, there's this two-step process, right? There's the Ag Commission, and then folks come to us, and there's a lot of, pre-application process. There's a lot to it, and we have to. It requires changing the ordinance. So it's coming. I can't give you an exact deadline. It is definitely on the top of my list for sure.
If I may, the Board of Supervisors has given us direction to first implement cannabis retail. And so that's the first thing that we'll be developing an ordinance that will allow retail in the unincorporated county. And we're going to endeavor to make that as straightforward as possible, identifying specific zones and limitations, and perhaps allowing it as a permitted use, and to do so with full CEQA compliance in adopting the ordinance, so that there's no additional CEQA review required for each individual retail business, which again for retail is relatively simple. But the direction that we have is that the streamlining of or rewriting of our ordinance, Cannabis 2.0 for San Benito County, would come next. And so we'll get the retail in front of the commission for your recommendation to the Board of Supervisors, and then begin work on the balance of the streamlining the ordinance.
Thank you.
Again, the part of the process that this county has includes a criminal background check. It includes a competitive application and prioritization and selecting a limited number of applicants per each round. All of those happen before people apply for a conditional use permit with the planning department. So most of the delay or comes before people even apply for a conditional use permit. And in Humboldt County, where I wrote the first cannabis regulatory ordinance in the state, it was purely a land use issue and not any of this regulatory requirement that essentially happens at the state level again anyway. Once they apply for a state license, they have to go through the criminal background check. There's no reason to do it at the local level. But that's what's in our ordinance, and we'll have to address that. So that's my understanding. That's something that local law enforcement insisted on when the ordinance was drafted before I arrived here. So I think Humboldt County is now working on Cannabis 3.0. So, Humboldt is obviously has the largest number of state licenses for all aspects of the cannabis business of any county in the state. So, whereas San Benito County is probably last, if not next to last, of any counties that permit cannabis. There are many counties that don't, but among those that do, San Benito County ranks near the bottom in terms of the number of permits at the state level. And again, you can't have a cannabis business without a state license.
And was there a cap? I don't recall. It was a long time ago for the number of businesses allowed to operate in the county?
Just cultivation. I believe the cap is 50, and I'm guessing, I don't know if our ag commissioner person is here. I think that's in chapter 7 or
50.
title 7. Sorry.
Well, that would be more than what we have right now. So we.
By a lot. And I will also say I get calls quite frequently from folks who are interested in coming on over. So we just need to, pave the way. And I promise that we're on it. I'm working on it.
Yeah. It'll be a process where we work with the board and the members of the public to refine the ordinance, and hopefully we'll get it more correct this time.
Exactly.
Hopefully sooner rather than later, though. Any additional commissioner thoughts? Yeah, no wheels going there. Okay. Item number 7, Planning Commission training, due process.
Give me just a second. And I will be tag teaming with my esteemed colleague, Mr. Ellenwood, who will correct me if I say anything really weird or wrong. Okay. And how do I get this? Is he? Oh, I wanted to whisper, but this is on. Sorry. Use that F5 to maximize. I do shortcuts. Yeah, thank you. Thanks. Working out the bugs. Thank you. So, we're here to talk today about due process and fair hearings, which is always relevant. As you know, I don't have to tell you, but I will. Planning Commission wields considerable power over how our community grows and develops. Your decisions shape what happens here to a large extent. And because of that, you have a duty to the community to ensure fair and transparent decision-making. And the guidance for that lives both in the Constitution and in the general concept of the public trust. Fifth Amendment of the Constitution: no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Again, decisions made here impact those protected interests, whether it's approving, denying, modifying, conditioning. All of that will have an impact either on an applicant, a neighbor, or the community broadly. The due process concept is broken into substantive and procedural. We'll be dealing primarily with procedural. Substantive just says that decisions must be fair, impartial, and unbiased. Procedural has to do with providing everybody who has the potential to be impacted by your decisions with notice and opportunity to be heard. Decisions that your body makes must be based on substantial evidence in light of the whole record, and that should say public record, because this is a public and transparent process. Not personal opinion, not what you read in the newspaper, not what folks want you to do necessarily, but what is in front of you in the record. And that includes input from the public, of course. Notice, planning and zoning law, state government code provides a lot of the noticing requirements. And as you know, our staff prepares and handles the noticing, and then the certificate that noticing has happened, so you know that that was proper. Opportunity to be heard, again, applies to both the applicants and any affected parties, neighboring property owners, or the general public. Just a brief rundown on notice, when, at least 10 days prior to the first public hearing. Who, again, all persons whose interests may be impacted by your decisions and the action taken here. We mail to neighbors within 300 feet of the project site if it is specific to the project. Some recommendations that you may make on zoning may impact the entire community and are not site-specific, so that mailing rule will not always apply. Newspaper gets published at least 3 public places. Currently, here at the administration building, at our office, at the RMA, and the county website are all public notices. And then again, for projects that are site-specific, such as variances, CUPs, posting at the project site as well. Legislative versus quasi-judicial acts. Legislative act is making law, and that is done by our board, where they adopt a new zoning ordinance, general plan amendment. You folks generally will be handling quasi-judicial acts, and that is applying an existing law, ordinance, policy to a specific fact situation. So determining whether somebody's proposed commercial development meets all of our codes and policies, making a decision on tentative subdivision maps, conditional use permits, again, and variances. You're looking at, this is what the county code says, this is what our policies say, how do they apply to a specific project?
Just to amplify that
Please.
somewhat, the planning and zoning law calls for the planning commission to make recommendations to the Board of Supervisors on legislative acts, and requires that a public hearing be conducted by the planning commission before you make those recommendations. But you're acting in a quasi-legislative role in that respect, because you're only making recommendations to the board because legislative acts have to be taken by the highest decision-making authority. Whereas with quasi-judicial acts, tentative subdivision maps, conditional use permits, variances, this body is the decision-making body, subject to an appeal to the Board of Supervisors. So that's the difference between some of the aspects of the differences between the two.
Nice, thank you. The administrative record, again, and a lot of this is repetitive because it's important. Decisions must be made solely upon information contained in the administrative records of the meeting, including application documents, written staff reports, the oral reports or presentations made by staff, letters to the commissioners and included in the packet, and information, again, that comes from the public comment period, and sometimes in writing or Zoom. All of that is part of the public record, and that's what your decisions need to be made based on. outside information. We also call that ex parte communication. Any information that is specific to an application that you are exposed to before, outside of the hearing. That can be a telephone conversation, that can be a site visit, that can be somebody that you met at a party who says, hey, are you looking at this project coming down the pike? All of that happens outside of this public process, and there are dangers to that. You need to always be thinking about what all of the commissioners are aware of, what the public is aware of when they come into this hearing room. Outside information should be, really, in my opinion, must be disclosed during the meeting. Normally that happens after the staff report is presented, but before the public comment, where it's very common to hear, you will weigh in and say, I visited the site and spoke to the applicant. There's nothing wrong with that. That is routine and part of the process. But again, everybody needs to know what that was. The risks that it may influence you, that you were hanging out with somebody who has a project coming before you. Maybe it's not intentional, but it was a beautiful day. You get to walk on this beautiful site. You have to always be thinking about how those communications may, again, unintentionally influence your decision. It may create the appearance, if somebody knows that you are out to the site. Are they thinking that you have a special relationship? Again, it doesn't mean that you can't do those things. It means be transparent, talk about it, and be thinking about it. And anything that involves information, facts that are not available to the other commissioners, that taints the process. They all need to know as much as possible what you know about the project.
Let me just say that sometimes site visits can be arranged as part of a special meeting with notice to the public, but often that of course means that the public would have the right to attend as well, and that can become unwieldy with a highly controversial project with dozens or hundreds of people who want to be part of that. Again, it is because land use is such a site-specific consideration. I strongly encourage planning commissioners to make site visits. Having your feet on the ground and knowing what the look, feel, and context of a specific project is really important to responsible decision-making. But again, the impressions that you have or the information that you learn from those site visits, you need to share that as part of the public hearing process.
Thank you. Bias and related issues. Bias occurs if a decision maker cannot reasonably be expected to render a decision on the evidence in front of you because you've already made up your mind about a particular project, particular applicant, a particular part of the county. If you think that you cannot be fair, you have a duty to the public, and this goes with the idea of public trust, to step out and to not participate. Some of this overlaps with conflict of interest, but really it's also just being honest with yourself and your preconceived notions. And it's work that everybody has to do. We have to do it to some extent to really have a clean slate. And if you can't, then again, you have a duty to step out. And again, there's always a fine line between actual bias and the appearance of bias. It's pretty fuzzy. It's kind of one of those, you know it when you see it or when you feel it. But if you're hanging out with folks that are part of a project, just be aware of it. It's a small town. I mean, you guys know everybody, so it's inevitable that you run into folks at parties, at conventions, at the brewery. But you have a special heightened duty that you just need to keep in mind because you've assumed this position, right? It puts you in a different category.
One example of that, I mean, there are cases, published, appellate cases that address these issues. One example is a planning commissioner who is a member of a local advocacy group and wrote newsletter articles about a particular project that then came before the commission. And because they didn't recuse themselves, the approval of the project was overturned, and it had to go back for consideration without the participation of that commissioner. And so that's the kind of problem that you want to avoid if you support a project or if you are opposed to a project, having that additional litigation exposure for the county and, and public embarrassment for yourself is something that would be best to avoid.
Right. Public service is noble. That's why we're all here. But we have to be mindful that we are representing the county, and you folks have as I said, you have an important duty.
If you have a question about whether or not your opinions or prior considerations might be a problem, please consult with Assistant Director Bolster Grant or County Council, and we'd be happy to help you think through that problem.
Thank you. Yeah. Again, don't pre-commit to decisions involving particular folks, sites, particularly when you know an application may come before you, that they are involved in a project that you will make a decision on. There's a piece about campaign contributions. I'm not really sure where I got that. You can make contributions. I think there's a piece about running for office and receiving contributions. Well, let's skip.
It's been known that planning commissioners do run for office on occasion.
Oh, well, there you go. If you have run for office and received campaign contributions from folks, be mindful that could implicate some sort of bias or prejudgment. So beware. Decisions must always advance the long-term interest of the entire community. And again, this is sort of restating a lot of the same things, not the interests of a single organization, group, business, bowing to political pressure. And this is hard because you get the phone calls, I know, but it is corrosive to the public trust. And we need folks to trust in what we do beyond anything else. Other related issues, reasonable opportunity to be heard. This is kind of a little bit of an outlier, but sometimes 3 minutes may not be enough on a particularly controversial project or complex project. Just make sure that if folks have an interest that they need to communicate, be flexible. And the bottom line is a reasonable opportunity to be heard. If folks don't show up for their own hearing, their own item, you don't have to continue it, but that shouldn't bias you and make you think one thing or another about that particular applicant or opponent. And continuances are routine. Again, this is about the opportunity to be heard. And if somebody needs more time to prepare, you want to give them the benefit of the doubt.
Another point to make is that the public record includes written comments. And so if people write letters or send emails, they don't need to read them into the record. The chair has the discretion to remind people of that, that thanking them for their comments, that they've been received and acknowledged and reviewed by all of the commissioners without having to, again, read their prepared remarks into the record.
Perfect. So I'm just concluding with just a few of the many, many, many cases out there that sort of illustrate some of the points we've been talking about. Case against the County of Ventura. Proper notice to adjacent landowners was not proper, and that decision was overturned. Another case having to do with substantive due process. A zoning ordinance was held to be arbitrary and discriminatory. We didn't talk a lot about substantive due process, but our ordinances, our policies need to be rationally related to the general public welfare. And then City of Hermosa Beach, City Council member had, would have been best to disqualify himself when taking a vote on a project that impacted the view from his own rental residence. So you don't have to own the property to have that kind of conflict or issue a rental or any other sort of relationship where, again, the outcome is going to benefit you. Be thinking about it. And yeah, any questions, anything to add, anything that I...
No, I would just point out that the due process can cross the line into that legislative quasi-judicial distinction that we were talking about, where there is a change of use resulting from the legislative decision. In other words, if you're changing the land use designation under the general plan, that allows a significant difference in the uses permitted in that area, and the same goes for zoning. There is a requirement under the government code, the planning and zoning law, that the neighbors be given notice, and that was the case with Horn versus the county's Ventura. And so if there's a change in use, even though it's a legislative act, it does require specific notice because of the potential impact on the property interests of neighboring property owners.
That is all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any public comment? Mr. Betancourt.
Being a ex-planning commissioner, one thing that you guys up there gotta understand, those people there are your servants and also the servant of the public. Sometimes they forget that, in my experience. So, am I correct in saying that? Don't let them scare you. You guys should be making the decisions. They're supposed to be telling you what the rules are or the zoning rules are and that sort of thing. That's has been my experience in the past. Okay.
Thank you. Any additional public comment?
None by Zoom.
Commissioners, any comments or questions, concerns? No? Okay, well, thank you for the presentation. Commissioner announcements? Commissioner Scagliotti? Was there I think? No? Okay. Commissioner Pack? No? Okay. I'm just going to, for my announcement, I'm just going to bring up the fact that we still haven't had our ethics training, and I don't know how, if there's a certain period of time before somebody gets in trouble. I'm not sure if that's the county or us individually. I would hope the county. But at some point, I think we need to get together with maybe the chair of the board and get our ethics training, because when my first time around, We had it within, I think, a month of getting sworn in, and now we're going into May.
Well, I can point out to you that the Assembly Bill 1234 required biannual, every 2-year ethics training is available online from the Attorney General's office and also from the Institute for Local Government. And I would encourage each of you to take advantage of that opportunity. It doesn't have to be a live training or presentation. And I'll ask that the staff send you each a link for those resources.
Thank you.
They're excellent, and you can do it on your own time and break it up, and it will, you'll still meet the requirement.
Okay, thank you. A link would be great because the internet's a big place.
It is indeed.
Okay. Anything else? Anything else? Good. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion, we adjourn.
I'll second that motion.
Okay. We have a second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
None. 5-0. Thank you.